No, I think last year I was right about here. I will try not to fall off. So let's be really honest here. It's beautiful outside. And I am really sorry if I'm the reason you're indoors, but I'm going to try to make it worth your while. So as Sid mentioned, my name is Mandy Huth. I am the VP of Cybersecurity for Kohler Corporation. And 1 year ago, I stood up on this same stage, and I had been 100 days in and had met my coldest day ever of negative 53 degrees with the wind chill. It was pretty cold, so I was loving Florida. Beauty is I'm still loving Florida, but it's not quite so cold this year. So last year, I talked about a case study and what I thought was going to happen after my first 100 days, what I thought my strategy was going to be at Kohler. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but this is the sequel. So now I've been there a year plus 100 days, and it looks maybe not exactly the same as what I thought about a year ago. So for those of you that don't know Kohler, let's talk a little bit about how interesting of a hybrid and how highly diversified they are. First, we have our hospitality arm. And our hospitality arm has requirements because we're protecting consumer data. So we have privacy concerns, we have regulatory concerns, we have PCI requirements. By the way, we will be hosting the Ryder Cup this year. Woo, pretty excited about that. We also do what you would consider traditional manufacturing. We have a power division, we make engines, we make gen sets. Right? So when you think of OT and automation of our smart factories, how are we doing that? We really focus on that in our power group. And then what you know us for, kitchen and bath. The interesting thing about kitchen and bath is, although we're a company of 150 years, and we've spent 125, 145 of those being a traditional kitchen and bath manufacturer, we're moving into a whole new arena. We have smart faucets, we have smart showers, we are looking into profiles, we're sending data up to the cloud. So all of a sudden, we're part of a digital era too. So we cross all of these spectrums, and I have the great pleasure of having to secure them all. And they all require a little bit different security. So what did I say last year? Because I'm a woman of my word. Let's be honest about what's going on. Last year, I talked about IT-OT convergence. And I said that we are better together. And so some of the things I mentioned, we talk about where our opportunities are. And really, it's around people, process, and technology. And I said in that order. And what happens is, from a people perspective, we have this opportunity to exploit cross-functional education. And what that means, and they talked a little bit about it this morning, the Dow partners were talking about sitting with each other and actually understanding what the other person is doing. Because once you get that, it's like, oh, light bulb. And I know how to apply something I did to something you already do, and can we make that better? Process, so important. And this is where the opportunity is. And I think all of you will agree that it's a lot less costly to design security into your tool sets than to have to retrofit them, right? So people and process are really what I focus on. Technology, I can probably find a technology that will meet any need that I need to solve. So I have to get the people and the process right first. But we did talk about some system consolidations and things that we were doing to try to leverage systems, whether you were in IT and OT together. So that's what I said a year ago. And all of that, the foundation of all of that was to have a consistent framework. What standards are you using? Understanding your business's risk appetite so that you apply it correctly, and that you have alignment with all of your business partners about which is the priority. So this is 1 year ago. You're going to find out, I believe that most of what I said is true, but we're going to approach it a little bit differently. So what is my challenge 1 year later at Kohler? Digital requirements are real. It doesn't matter what part of the business you're sitting in. You have smart home, right? IoT. I've got devices going out the door. We were just at the Consumer Electronics Show, and we showed a mirror that has a radio that tells you the news. It has video. So it's got everything my user wants, but I have to protect that. I have, smart home. Not smart home, smart factory, so SKE 4.0. What are my robotic processes? I have to punch holes in my network to let that data out because they want to be connected to something. Direct to consumer, right? We have distributors, absolutely, but we want to enable our consumers to customize their experience. So we want direct to consumer, we want e-commerce. Supply chain, distribution, probably our biggest challenge, and we've got to make them faster and more agile. So we've got to put iPads in their hands, right? We've got to make sure they've got the data they need where they need it. And then you've got data and analytics. How can we be predictive? Take all of these data, all this data, throw it in a data lake and make sense of it so that I can be more predictive instead of reactive. So you take all of those things, all of those challenges, and I'm going to go back to people, process, and technology. I loved what the gentleman from Dow said this morning, and I'm going to go back to this. He said, not everything that can be done should be done. And that was really profound. That wasn't in my deck yesterday, so I told Sid I had to change some things. So we're going to go back to people, process, and technology. So what are the challenges here? What are the things that might make this not work? And I would love to say IT-OT convergence will work everywhere. And I think there's a right mix for every business. But it doesn't necessarily have to be everywhere. Let's pick the right places. So with people, skill sets. Everybody needs to know how to protect data in transit and data at rest. It doesn't matter if you're on the IT side or the OT side. But the skill set you need to maneuver through certain technology is different. So which one's more important, right? Can you bring those teams together? I think a lot of that depends on organizational size. I was having some great conversations with people here recently, and they've seen it successfully work to bring teams together in small and medium businesses because their IT and OT are close enough that they can make those work. But when you're talking about large enterprises of teams of 100, that might not necessarily make sense for you. When we talk about process, frameworks, everybody needs one. You might be using ISO, you might be using NIST, you might be using ICS, you might be using ISA, name it. But we all need a framework. So from a process perspective, we can all agree that whether you're an IT or OT, you need a framework. And you need to understand your life cycle. What's the life cycle of your data? Where is it born? Where is it created? How do you manage it? How do you monitor it? And then how do you retire it? So those might look a little different depending on whether you're IT or OT. And then you've got technology. You've got these data sets, right? So from a technology perspective in IT, you're really worried about the database fields that are housing your customer relationship management data, and how are you going to protect that? When you're on the OT floor, you're like, oh, I need machine-to-machine communication, and they need to be talking to each other. It's a different data set. Right? So how do you bring these together and converge them? And then you have your different platforms. And one of the things that I've challenged my team to do is we don't want to buy point solutions. We want to buy solutions that will grow with us and will evolve over time so that I have one single place to go and be able to get everything. I know there's no silver bullet, but if we can get, from 50 vendors to 20 vendors, and they have multiple capabilities. In the IT side, we say, oh, okay, well, you do email protection, but you also have a CASB Lite, and you have data protection Lite. Well, are those good enough? So that becomes a platform that we might want to use. On the OT side, right, you have to look at, okay, can I get a single pane of glass that gives me monitoring analytics for my PLCs, for my line, and gives me the performance metrics that I need all in one place? Those are the types of platforms we look at. Those don't necessarily converge, but we know that we have to find a way to use technology to our advantage. So with that said, we're going to do a case study. You got all these different things coming at you, some from the IT side, some from the OT side, and all of them may or may not have the same objective, but they all bring risk to your environment. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how we can use certain processes, whether you're on IT or OT, to make a risk-based decision and act accordingly. Specifically, we're going to talk about 3 things. We are going to talk, first I want to talk about Kohler's framework. We chose to use the CIS critical security controls. Again, I don't care which framework you use, they all map to one another, and their guidelines are very similar. Find a benchmark, know what standards you're going to use, live by them. My team actually knows these numbers by heart. There are only 20 of them, so they should be able to memorize those. So today we're going to talk about understanding the edge, understanding your data ecosystem. Where does your data live? It's not traditional anymore, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about connectivity. Oops, a little too fast for myself. When we talk about connectivity, whether you're IT or OT, things need to start talking to each other. Integrations, how do I get it to talk, and how do I secure it? And we're going to talk about identity. What access do you want to give, and what authorization? How are you gaining access, and what authorizations are you giving people? So getting people into the systems they need with the right roles and the right authorizations to do what they need to do. And if we take those three processes, I posit to you that whether you're IT or OT, with the right process, you can build an ecosystem built on trust. Okay, so let's talk about the edge. First thing with the edge, what does that mean? What does it mean to you? I think it means something different to all of us, because we have to define where the data lives. It might be your network boundaries, things that we traditionally know as our enterprise network. You might live in the cloud. You might have a smart device. You might have bring your own device, which is other people's networks that you're allowing them to connect from home. All of these different sensors that we have coming in from wherever, the edge is really blurry, and we have to be able to protect it. Define your use cases. Who are your users? So sometimes it's an end consumer. Sometimes it's your suppliers, right? How am I getting raw materials into my plant to make sure that these things are happening? Sometimes it's your distributors getting product out the door for you. Sometimes it's your vendors needing to come in and do maintenance. Sometimes it's your associates just trying to do their job. So all of these people finding a place to connect to you or to somehow get into your network, we have to define what that is. And then you need to understand the life cycle of the data. Again, from the time it's born all the way through retirement, whether it's destruction, archive, however you need to do that, you need to understand those things. So Gartner has this really great thing they're calling, and I love to use this word because I feel a little sassy about it. It's called SASE, and they call it SASE. Secure Access Service Edge. And it's kind of a combination of your traditional network boundary protection overlaid with WAN, and it takes a dynamic approach to trust with contextual clues. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen the Gartner report, it really talks about where data's living today and how we're going to protect it. And it's kind of in the hype cycle right now, but it's really interesting information that Kohler's looking at and seeing how we can leverage as well. So, going back to my framework, boundary defense is critical security control 12, web browser protection 7. So we're going to talk about the edge. So we know about our data and where it's living. It's everywhere. Now let's talk about connectivity. Know what you have. Critical security controls 1 and 2, inventory. You need to know what you have. You need to know where it lives. And with those things, you need to be able to use tags and classification. I would say, just show of hands, how many of you have a CMDB? Enterprise, IT, OT, it doesn't matter. Okay, of those, how many of you think your CMDB is done really well? Well done. Well, at least 2 of you, well done. It is the opportunity to exploit. CMDB usually isn't that expensive, and you probably already have a technology that will support it. It is a human capital cost, and you have to do it well. I think I read like 80% of people think that they don't know what 100% of their inventory is, right? Across industries. It's just a staggering number. Use tags. Is it IT, is it OT? Tag criticality. Does it need to be highly available? Is it mission critical, or is it a low availability target? Tag, classify its sensitivity. Does it have sensitive data? You know, do I need confidentiality, or is it low risk data, right? So this is an opportunity for us to use metadata that I don't think we're using enough. Oops, look at me go. And so when we start to understand, it's because it's over here, and I'm way ahead of myself. One more. There we go. Okay. And then know its impact, which we just talked about. There we go. So with that, if we understand classification, and we know how our assets, what we have, how we want to treat it, we don't treat everything the same. That's the other thing that happens, right? We treat all of our assets the same, except those 10 that we know that we absolutely cannot be without. Everything else kind of gets pushed to the side, and we treat it all the same. Well, I would posit that, you know, the low risk stuff, I'm not as much worried about. We can certainly argue that bad actors will look for that, right? Because they're looking for the point of least resistance. But if you raise that bar high enough that you're an unattractive target, they're not going to waste their time looking for that pivot. So look at your configuration benchmarks. That's critical security control number 5. Again, going back to the process. For IT, you might be using the CIS benchmarks. If you're OT, you might be using the industrial controls security benchmarks, right? And so there are different benchmarks for them, but the process to apply them and to treat them differently based on their risk is the same. Let's see if I can get this to work. So hardware and software inventory, critical security control, and secure configuration, security control number 5. So far, so good, right? IT and OT can use these processes. So let's talk about identity. Identity means many things to different people because an entity can be anything, and every entity that acts upon your network needs an identity. You can be a person, you can be an action, a service, right? A service account, or you can be a thing, you can be a sensor. So IT, OT, doesn't matter. We need to make sure every entity has an identity. We then need to make sure that we require every single one of them to authenticate and have appropriate authorization. A couple of things here that we want to consider is with authentication and authorization, we want to give them just-in-time access and just what they need access, no more, right? So privilege, least privileged principle, we can do that either place, right? We want to give all of the machines that need and sensors that need to be connected the right access to do their job, but we don't want them to have more than that. We don't want them to have an open port to the internet when they don't need it, right? There it is, just in time and just enough access. The other thing, the other principle, as we start to create trust using identity, is the idea of presume you have been breached, right? Let's just assume it. And if you do that, what you want to be able to do is prevent lateral movement. East-west movement is not good. So in a trust environment, right, without boiling the ocean, absolutely segmentation where we can to prevent lateral movement into our most important areas. Okay? And then we need to monitor and improve, right? So once we've given access, we want to make sure that we validate that they have the right access ongoing. How many of you have done a job transfer and you keep all the access that you had previously and it goes with you? And if you've been with a company 20 years, you have all kinds of access to all kinds of the company even though you haven't touched it in years. We want to make sure that we don't do that. And I'm going to forget which numbers these are. Privilege is 4, so making sure you have privileged access. Access control, I think, is 14. Account monitoring is 16, right? So again, one process, one benchmark that can be applied to any kind of entity. So what are the benefits? Let's talk a little bit about the consistency, right? So because we're using a single framework, whichever one, or even a mix of them, but be consistent, decide what you're going to use, and leverage that. then you can talk to your business users and your business partners every single time consistently. I don't talk about a technology called Proofpoint. I don't talk about phishing technology, to prevent it. I talk about email protection every time. I talk about web browser protection. And using that vernacular over and over again helps my business users have a conversation with me. So we go back to cross-collaboration, cross-functional understanding. The first thing you need is a common vernacular. We're going to make risk-based decisions because we now have everything has an identity. We know its classification and its risk, and we can treat it according to our policies based on that risk. So you see, we're going to verify the device, right, or the person, the user. We're going to connect them, right? So the user is your identity. The device is your connectivity. And then you're going to limit access and privilege, right? So all of these things, you're going to be able to make dynamic decisions based on the risk. Do I care if you have access to my internal SharePoint or internal intranet? Maybe, but probably not as much as I care about you having access to my CAD drawings, or not as much as I care about you having access to my guns that are scanning my QR codes that are sending inventory out the door, right? So we create a trust model, and we can do that with contextual clues, and we've just created them with the same policy on both sides of the spectrum. So, risk acceptance based on our trust process and principles. So what have I learned? 100 days plus 1 year. We're using this. First, people, process, technology. In that order. I still believe it. You have to have the right people. You have to give them the right capability. And we're going to do that with a consistent process that can be used across both. That doesn't necessarily mean your business needs a converged IT/OT SOC. Might not work for you. It might work for you, but people and process are going to make you successful. Second, be realistic. This is not easy. It has a really long tail, but it's doable if you chunk it out, right? My program's at least 3 years long. Last year, and I told this story last night, and I think it still resonates. Last year, in my 100 days, we had 8 things on my strategic roadmap for last year. And we got 7 of them done, and we did them okay. This year, we have 4 strategic priorities. And I've told my team, I want us to be really good at all 4 of those. I want to knock it out of the park. So give your people room by being realistic about what's achievable. It doesn't have to be done overnight. Gradual improvements matter, right? That's agile. Iterate. Continue to improve. And even if you only get 100 devices or entities ready this year, that's 100 more than you had in a consistent process. And it repeats and it repeats and it repeats. Identify your ecosystem. It's probably the most important thing. We all say it. It's really hard to do. It's simple, not easy, right? I know we can do it, but we've got to get better at that. And I think that we're getting there with some of the technologies that will enable our process, things like SASE. Secure by design. Still believe it. It's going to cost you less if you configure it early. Configure it with security in mind. Put it into production the first time the right way. It's going to save you money. Total cost of ownership is much less. And I always have to throw in a hashtag because I really like them. So hashtag trust model. We've got a process. Think about what your rules are for giving people the right access and the right authorization based on their needs. So, people, process, and technology. I think process is the winner today. And a year ago, I said IT and OT convergence. Today, I still think we're better together. Thank you for your time.